Harvard Divinity School.
Uses and abuses of power in alternative spiritualities. Implications for spiritual care of patients and communities. April 27th, 2023.
So in my PhD project called Sacred Plant Spiritual Experiences, I examine how people, as part of contemporary spirituality, use entheogenic plants like ayahuasca in order to heal and to connect with the spiritual world, and how this gives the participants experiences of both disempowerment and empowerment. A minister doing research on ayahuasca may sound like a strange combination, but typically me, I embrace that which is on the edge. We will look at how transformations of power during ceremonies are significant processes in the participants' lives, and how this can be interpreted as both uses and abuses of power. Power can be defined as the ability to move people or to hold them down and prevent them from moving. Power is thus put in context with the roles, functions, and personality of the wielders of power. But power can be understood both as having power over someone, but also as giving power to someone by empowering them. A power critical perspective can show whether the exercise of power may be degrading or uplifting, offensive or empowering. Ritual practices with ayahuasca are within the field of marginalized spiritualities. In Norway, it's illegal to use ayahuasca, and the participants are vulnerable, both because they have to go underground, but also because they are seeking healing from traumas, physical and psychological disorders, which of course makes them vulnerable. DEA describes use of ayahuasca as a risk to the public health. However, this study will not take stand whether ayahuasca is harmful, but will examine the participants' subjective experiences combined with my observations at ceremonies. In recent years, there has been an increased use of entheogenic plants in Europe as a way to experience the mysterious, because psychedelics were reported as having the ability to open the door to the unconscious. Ayahuasca is used in ceremonies, and this may lead to visions, insights, and healing. Let me briefly present the frameworks of my study within the science of religion. It is a qualitative study where I conduct field work, that is, participating observations at ceremonies with ayahuasca and in-depth interviews with 14 participants. The theoretical perspective in this presentation is power dynamics related to disempowerment, empowerment, and vulnerability. Power theory can help us look more nuanced at different power dynamics in the ritual practice. The participants in this study experienced the ritual practice mainly as an empowering practice. However, this feeling of empowerment does not occur without also a kind of breakdown or disempowerment of the participants, both physically and psychologically. Let's start with how the physical reactions during the ceremonies can be experienced as a transformation from disempowerment to empowerment. In ayahuasca ceremonies, participants often experience vomiting and diarrhea. This is understood as a purification or catharsis, which is a necessary part of the ceremony. The participants told me how vomiting and diarrhea sometimes left them completely powerless and could be so overwhelming that they experienced it as a feeling of total disempowerment. One of the participants described it as loss of control, and I quote, "As I was laying there, I couldn't get up until about an hour had passed. I was completely powerless, and that's a terrible feeling." As she lay there in her own filth and vomit, she heard a voice speaking to her, a voice she interpreted as her higher self speaking to her, saying, "Holy shit." And as this insight came to her that the cleansing was holy, then the whole power dynamic changed from disempowerment to empowerment. The participants understand illness as becoming aware of traumas and patterns that do not serve them, and the ultimate way to release trauma is to throw up. This is a way of surrendering and letting go. The insights they experienced in the ceremonies transformed them from disempowerment to empowerment. What had been disgusting became holy. The feeling of powerlessness turned into strength and healing. An interesting aspect regarding power is how concepts are turned upside down, as we see here. Both the ritual leaders and the participants know in advance that they will experience such forms of purification that knock them out. In what ways can it be understood as use or abuse of power when the ritual leaders give the participants such strong plant substances that they completely lose control over bodily functions? Psychologist David Worm, who has worked extensively with victims of spiritual and ritual abuse, has come up with the following definition of abuse of spiritual power. Spiritual abuse is a misuse of power in a spiritual context, whereby spiritual authority is distorted to the detriment of those under its leadership. It influences one's inner and outer worlds and has the potential to affect the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual domains of the individual. There is no doubt that strong forces are at play during the consumption of ayahuasca, and that the participants experience that they are affected in all these domains during the ceremonies. But is it abuse of power? The body becomes the place where ritual and spirituality occur, and understandings of bodily processes are linked to the interpretations of this. According to anthropologist Mary Douglas, we must interpret rituals around feces as symbols of society and see the forces and dangers that are felt from social structures reproduced in miniature in the human body. Pierre Bourdieu shows how all our senses, including our social senses, are involved in bodily practices. And what we find beautiful or disgusting, empowering or debilitating, varies in different cultures and at different times. So, who interpret the experiences of the purification process and the following emotions? Spiritual groups may have emotional regimes regarding which emotions are wanted or even accepted, and the leaders have the power to orchestrate the participants' emotional register and reactions and the ability to regulate these in ceremonies. The insidious thing about abuse of power is its ability to camouflage itself. In other words, abuse of power can be very subtle, and you can experience it without realizing what it is. Spiritual abuse is coercion and control of one individual by another in a spiritual context. But can it be interpreted as coercion when the participants themselves have voluntarily chosen to participate in the ritual practice? In any case, one should question the real opportunity the participants have to withdraw along the way if they find out that they do not want to drink ayahuasca during the ceremony, and to what extent the participants are looked after when they experience disempowerment and are thus left in a vulnerable state. Spiritual abuse is a multifaceted and multi-layered experience that is both a process and event, affecting the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual domains of an individual. But spiritual use of power may also affect the same domains in a positive way. Use of power can be intentional and beneficent. Let's look at how the participants can experience transformations in terms of their mental health and how vulnerability is taken care of. One of my informants was traumatized by her husband over several years. The abuses were psychological, physical, and sexual. During a ceremony, memories of the abuse surfaced. She relived the abuse, cried, and was very distressed as she lay on the floor during the ceremony. She felt powerless and afraid. Suddenly, she heard Ayahuasca talk to her. And in that moment, everything changed. The masculine energy that had been frightening and disgusting changed into what she experienced as pure divinity. At the same time, all her foremothers stepped forward to her, and Ayahuasca showed her the importance of finding her own voice and using it. She told me that this was the most beautiful thing she had ever experienced, and that the experience during the ceremony was like moving from hell to heaven, from powerlessness to what she describes as the possession of an enormous primal power. A month after this ceremony, she suddenly met her ex-husband again. When she had previously met him after the divorce, she was completely devastated, she said. But when she now met him, she was in her power, the same power that she had experienced in the ceremony. And she felt that, and I quote, "Now I am finally healed of all his abuses," end of quotation. It gave her a huge sense of empowerment. The participants tell how mental disorders and powerlessness have changed after the ritual practice of ayahuasca and how they now experience more joy and vitality in life. But they also say that they had to descend into the most terrifying darkness during the ceremonies, both physically and mentally and spiritually, before they got better. One of the participants put it this way: "I would say that the ayahuasca ceremony helped restore a deep dignity around what it means to be human and opened up a very rich and meaningful life." Here we see how the participants experience the dynamics of power in the ceremony as psychologically and existentially empowering. But how can we interpret empowerment in a ritual practice of ayahuasca? Humans have a fundamental need to seek and create meaning, especially when life shakes us and one must relate to the basic conditions in life. People who experience crisis of meaning can turn to ritual practices to gain clarity and find new directions in life. Ritualization is symbolic behavior that individuals and groups do based on a purpose and can therefore function as a resilience factor that can strengthen our ability to withstand the stresses of life. Existential ritualization is actions which express meaning related to life, to find ways to cope with life's difficulties, and is considered important for our health and necessary to maintain our existence. Human existence is fundamentally vulnerable. Kenneth Pergament understands religious coping as a process that contributes to help people find a sense of meaning and purpose, emotional comfort, personal control, intimacy with others, physical health, or spirituality. The participants in this study show that they participate in this ritual practice in order to heal or resolve a problem. This corresponds to William James's theories, which conclude that there is an uneasiness in man, and that the solution to this uneasiness is to be found in religion. By being in a relationship with higher forces, one can experience that the basic conditions of man, vulnerability, and the experience of being threatened can accommodate the longing for rescue, salvation, and healing. James therefore concludes that religious experiences are of great importance as an existential coping resource, moral motivation, and as a source of coping with life, even though he also acknowledges that there are religious practices that are degrading and destructive. How does the ritual practice facilitate the care of vulnerability? A ritual leader told how during the ceremonies, she always took into account that the participants were vulnerable people, and I observed that the ceremonies were characterized by warmth and care. The participants had conversations with the leaders before, during, and after the ceremonies. Quality assurance presupposes a good feedback culture from the participants, but also from external experts. The findings in this study show that the follow-up with the feedback from the participants worked well, but that external experts are not part of the ritual practice. There is no external supervision of the practice, presumably because it is illegal and not organized religion. So I will come with some final reflections and conclusions. There is an asymmetric power relationship between participants and leaders, as is the case in any religious practice. Foucault claims that power is everywhere. It is not because it encompasses everything. It is because it comes from everywhere. From this, we can draw the conclusion that the power-free zone does not exist. However, power manifests in certain subjects. A power analytical approach is therefore not about the presence of power or not, but about how power is used. The leaders have the power to define, and Mother Ayahuasca has great power, both biologically and chemically, but also the power that is given her as an authority speaking to them during the ceremonies. There is also power related to seclusion, as the ceremonies are far away from civilization, which may contribute to acceptance and submission. Power dynamics in marginalized spirituality is an extremely complex and sensitive subject. The use and abuse of power is a balance art. And in ritual practices with ayahuasca, as in almost every spiritual practice, we will find both positive and negative consequences for its participants, both use and abuse of power. The findings in this study have shown experiences of transformations from disempowerment to empowerment, but not the other way around. It is critically important to acknowledge the varieties in each person's experiences. Simultaneously, it is important to be forthright and naming the abuses of power that are unacceptable and provide spaces for critical discourse. Thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to present some of my research here at Harvard Divinity School.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.